justice.
And then there's a lot of talk of we're gonna help with the position inside.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States.
Kind of like the Nixon deep throat type of thing.
We've heard about these leakers, people who send and receive confidential government information. During the Trump administration, our government has turned into a sieve. Leakers weaponize information in order to thwart a duly elected administration. People inside agencies like the Department of Justice often pursue their own radical agenda. The media, rather than expose these people and shine a light on them, often conspire with them, getting the scoop and leaving the people in the dark. Meanwhile, the deep state cabal gets bigger and bigger. But not on our watch, because this time, when it comes to agencies like DOJ and HHS, our cameras were rolling. I'd like you to meet Jessica Schubel. She's a former employee inside the Department of Health and Human Services during the Obama administration. Jessica Schubel knows the deep state. Why? Because she's part of it.
There's like a level of resistance movement.
Inside? So did you get to do any of the like crazy stuff with Obama, like with the healthcare bill or whatever you guys call it?
The Affordable Care?
Yeah, the Affordable Care
Yeah,
Act.
that's what I worked on.
No way, you worked on that that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was. My last day was January 19th, so like right before inauguration.
Schubel now works as a senior policy analyst at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. But she is a conduit for leakers inside her former government department who are actively trying to obstruct administration policies.
Do you have any friends that still work there?
Yeah, I have a few.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can they like screw them over?
No, but they give me like information.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Nice. Your friend mailed you the policy that was about to come into effect. What policy was it?
It was the policy that allows the work requirement allows states to require Medicaid beneficiaries to work in order to get coverage.
Okay. And then she mailed it to you in the physical, like snail mail, like the post office, and then you got it. That's like awesome. It
was like kind of like the Nixon deep throat type of thing.
Is the resistance just your friend, or is it like a bunch of people?
It's like a bunch of people.
Oh, okay. And they were giving you information to help. So they were leaking information to you
Be able to help on the outside.
To help on the outside, and then you were able to forward that to lawyers.
Yeah, yes, or reporters.
Oh, nice. And then they were able to like help craft public opinion so that when that came out, people were basically like.
Sometimes it works that way. Sometimes it doesn't. So like the letter, like my letter that was rescinded, I didn't have a heads up that was happening.
Okay. What did you have a heads up on stuff?
Sometimes precedent is setting approval, or policy that they were writing, they would give me a heads up on.
When the president was writing a policy, or
no, when the health department was writing the policy.
Okay. And so they would write a policy and your friend would send it to you, and then you were able to craft opinion pieces.
Sometimes I got it. When I had another friend that was actually still there, and she would print things and then mail me copy. But
like physical mail or email? Because she's not allowed to send it through email. Thank you. Your friend mailed you information. Even though she technically probably wasn't supposed to.
Definitely wasn't supposed to.
So she sent you what the administration was about to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's so illegal about it? Just that you could write an article earlier than you otherwise could, or what's the big deal?
Confidential. Everything else is the same.
Oh, government information.
Yeah.
So your friend mailed you confidential government information that's illegal to mail.
Right.
And then you were able to write about that.
Right.
Is it illegal to receive it?
Probably.
We got illegal leaks, we got people receiving leaks. It's almost like we need a plumber. Instead, we have a lawyer. Steve, Jessica says she's breaking the law accepting this information. What say you?
Well, she's probably protected by the First Amendment if she's on the receiving end of the information. So unless she's hacking or playing some kind of active role in stealing documents, that would be another story. Her source, on the other hand, is probably at the very least violating what the regulations call the basic obligations of public service.
Schubel says this resistance movement is active and committed.
I actually was talking to someone before, I left my house. Yeah, and he was just telling me what's going on and what they're thinking and policy stuff.
Like, what can we do to slow Trump down?
Yeah, I mean, it helps me because then I can tell other people, and then we're all prepared for when it happens, and we can do something.
Awesome! Hell yeah!
Yeah.
This is real. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is irrefutable visual proof of an official who was in HHS taking information that was illegally given to her in order to thwart the executive branch's policies. Bill?
Absolutely, James. You cannot have a functioning government with people taking it upon themselves to illegally leak confidential information. Government cannot function that way. We cannot have a functioning democracy if people arrogate to themselves the ability to leak confidential government information.
What's the distinction between the transparency efforts that my organization, your organization does, and these sorts of leaks?
These people who are leaking from inside the government are doing it to thwart an incoming president's agenda. We are simply trying to expose the fraud that is occurring within the government itself.
Our investigation has focused on current federal government employees resisting. We found a lot of them by infiltrating the D.C. branch of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA.
One of our members works with DOJ. She's like pretty big into migrant justice stuff. So people everywhere, Allison Raymond.
I'm a paralegal at the Department of Justice. Nice. I work around the corner from the courts. That's how I got involved.
This is Allison Raybar, one of the leaders of DSA in D.C. This past June, she led a protest against Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen.
These kids will never be reunited with their parents because Kirstjen Nielsen's staff doesn't think it's necessary to make a plan.
That was public information. But what isn't public is how Allison Raybar at the Justice Department's Antitrust Division may be using federal government resources to further her resistance against the Trump administration. We caught her at a Democratic Socialists of America event preparing for a protest in the basement of a D.C. church.
So since a lot of your coworkers are more leftist, are they trying to do anything?
I wouldn't describe. I have a couple socialist workers where they joined DSA.
Yeah. Really?
It's great. But most of them are just sort of regular liberals.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are lawyers, which is not the most radical group.
Okay. But are they doing anything to fight against Trump?
A lot of us talk about it. So most of them are vaguely politically involved. So they might support candidates and do fundraisers, and some of them canvass.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of talk at work about how we can resist from inside.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pushback. Resist from inside.
Yeah.
Raybar confirms that her Justice Department coworkers resist from the inside, then boasts about how difficult it is for federal employees to be fired.
What's kind of lucky is that the DOJ, we can't get fired.
Yeah.
Her DSA colleague, Stuart Carafa, who works at the State Department, told us the same thing.
I have nothing to lose. It's impossible to fire federal employees. I don't know.
Allison brags that one of her colleagues who works at the Department of Agriculture resists by directly slowing down food stamp reform.
We have a member who works in the people that distribute food stamps. Mm-hmm. And they can take that away, and they're just slowing what they do. Make it done.
What do you say? What would
I
you
wait
say when
until
people
I just submit
call
order
something
approval on the 30th day.
Yeah.
On the 30th, we're going to do it in 5. Sometimes I do it on
What
day
do your
25.
actions?
Yeah. And what does that do though?
It just means that they can't start doing it. So it's very small. Mine is just launching a company and profits. But that means what they're doing means that people are going to be able to stay on food stamps.
Which is an interesting thing to dial in.
Which is really important.
In April, Raybar led a protest on the home of a D.C. lobbyist.
Jeremy Wiley is a lobbyist for Core Civic. Is everybody ready?
how they found Wiley's address was potentially felonious.
So we looked it up and we found a different address for him, and it turns out they'd sold that house and moved in like the last 6 months. So when we sent someone the secondary address, their license plate was outside, and it had a bumper sticker for a school their kid went to.
Okay.
I know that's very creepy, but it was very useful information. So we ran the license plate, and it was a car registered to Jeremy Wiley. So his car is parked outside a house that he does own as of very recently, and someone saw him through the window, which is also very helpful.
Also, we're able to run license plates through
We cannot do it officially.
Running license plates, but not officially. It appears as though they're using government resources to target private citizens, Steve.
Yeah, James, if that's the case, then we're looking at more violations of the Hatch Act, not just for use of federal time for political activity, but use of federal resources as well. In addition, I'd say it's once again a violation of basic obligations of federal service under a litany of regulations.
How do you guys find these people's addresses? Like, is this his personal home?
So Allison is a paralegal, so her living is researching people.
Okay.
So she's very good at researching people. So they just find the companies, and they find the people that run the companies, and they find their home addresses.
Got it.
She's
Okay.
How did you even find this place? Like, is it just all online?
We use public information on research, yeah. Anything anyone can find. When I'm off a hot mic, I can tell you guys about our research process.
Allison Raybar didn't want to speak freely because she was fouled around by a TV crew that day. LexisNexis is an online research tool with extensive databases for paying clients. It is an excellent tool for running legal background checks on people, but it is also extremely expensive. Was Allison Raybar using her Department of Justice resources for DSA work? Her colleague Natarajan Subramanian confirmed.
Because Cliff was telling me that she uses LexisNexis, but that's like a paid program.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she has used it. She uses it probably more.
So that doesn't work. It's not like DSA got a LexisNexis.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So I was thinking like that's. I mean, pretty expensive if we get it for DSA, but I think it's great that she's able to have that resource at work and use it for DSA.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that you would get fired for if you come in wrong.
Yeah.
The things that people know about her and her activities outside of this organization, like people do not have the silver bullet or like the smoking gun or whatever. If they were able to get proof of that, so, I mean, we're all walking that line in a lot of ways.
So is using the Department of Justice's LexisNexis the type of thing you could get fired for? Is Subramanian right?
Not only can she be fired, she should be fired. And I'm going to make certain the Attorney General of the United States finds out about this so he can take appropriate action. This is outrageous.
We've heard so much about the DOJ's abuses, whether it be Strzok, McCabe, Comey, but it's also important to note many of their foot soldiers are also marching with the same beat, with nobody holding them accountable. So we're going to expose them, because maybe exposing them publicly and identifying them may deter others from taking further subversive actions. And I'll tell you something else. Unlike the New York Times and the Washington Post, our stories are not going to be filled with anonymous, unnamed sources relaying quotes from other sources secondhand, months after the fact, with those attributions in quotation marks. Our videos don't need to take those types of liberties because our videos are clear, irrefutable content. But there is a deeper conflict of visions here between the journalist elite and the rights of the citizens to be informed. The perverse protection of the leakers and the resistors' identities have created this environment where this activity has been allowed to fester. See, transparency belongs to those who govern. Privacy belongs to the people. The lack of accountability has led to these federal workers not being afraid to be fired for anything, and certainly not for their illegal and unethical behavior. And if you think what you've seen here is bad, you won't believe what's next.
I work for the State Department. It's impossible to fire federal employees.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States.
Just at every level.
We've heard a lot about the deep state, a vast administrative bureaucracy, what some have called an extra-legal state within a state, anonymous, faceless, resistors seeking to thwart the consent of the governed and undermine a duly elected president. Many have called it a conspiracy theory, but after a recent New York Times op-ed, that conspiracy has turned into a political reality. For more than a year, Project Veritas has been investigating the deep state. We have caught, on our undercover cameras, conspirators admitting to violating their ethics reports, illegally using government resources, and subverting government policies. What you're about to see is the hidden face of the resistance inside the executive branch of our government. These avowed socialists, this unelected cabal, would argue that they're saving America. But by thwarting the will of the people, what they're actually doing is subverting our democracy and setting up a constitutional crisis. What is truly striking is their boldness. They are not afraid. They're even boastful about a warped reality where they won't get caught and couldn't get fired, even if they did.
I have nothing to lose. It's impossible to fire federal employees. I don't know.
Stuart Carafa is a card-carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Carafa may look the dull, bureaucratic State Department employee with his suit and tie, but make no mistake, this man is a radical who boasts of resistance, socialism, and the abuse of federal work rules.
I work for the State Department. I'm a civil servant, so I'm a union member and all that good stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's a little problematic. I look at it this way. So now that the administration cut my program that I was on, there was a cool data analytics program, and we were going to modernize, democratize, shine sunlight in places where it should be, and they cut it. And now I'm just straight 8:30 to 5. So it gives me so much more time and emotional bandwidth to do all of this stuff.
Carafa is not shy about how he uses his time at work to resist while being paid by the federal government.
Instead of...
So it's that, I'm going to do DSA work?
Yeah, pretty much.
You could do DSA work.
I do. I'm careful about it. I don't leave a paper trail. I leave emails. Any press that comes up, I leave that until after 5:30. But as soon as 5:31 hits, I've got my draft messages ready to send up.
Nice.
Carafa explains to our journalist that he waits till after official work hours to disseminate DSA-related emails that he had drafted while at work. Carafa thinks this delayed delivery will somehow protect him and his job.
Yeah, you got the work done. Ready, you just gotta press send now.
Right. So that was what is public record in this world? Maybe someday I'll go to Board of Elections jail. Probably not. U.S. State Department Stuart Carafa is bragging about how he improperly conducts campaign work for DSA during work hours. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I actually dropped out of law school after 1 year. But Steve Klein here actually graduated from law school. Steve, what is Stuart doing that is illegal?
Well, he's committing a fundamental violation of the Hatch Act by engaging in political activity while working for the federal government.
And Steve, what is this Hatch Act?
Well, the Hatch Act was designed specifically to prevent that kind of activity, to prevent your and my tax dollars from going to subsidize political activity, whether it's Republican, Democrat, or the Democratic Socialists of America.
Wow.
You guys don't have do you guys have cameras on your cubicles?
No, God no. But you could put two and two together probably.
Right.
It's web traffic.
Carafa is deeply involved in the Democratic Socialist political campaign efforts both in D.C. and Virginia. as evidenced by his private messages on the DSA internal communications app.
With like web traffic and, I mean, I could make the case before like a court of law that I'm going to the Virginia sort of campaign finance website, that I'm just interested in what people are doing politically.
Right.
But if they also go and look at like DSA minutes and like, officer positions, they'll be like, that's weird. You were the co-chair of the Electoral Caucus, and you spent 3 hours on the Virginia like campaign finance website. Then I have a
So then how do you do it, though? How would you do it?
I have nothing to lose. It's impossible to fire federal employees. I don't know.
Up, there it is. It's impossible to fire a federal employee. It's a refrain you're going to hear over and over again in these videos, these deep state officials using the rules of our government and lack of civil service reform to subvert the will of the people. Now, here is Richard Manning. You've been working on this government reform and oversight issue for years. Tell us what is going on here.
Well, James, the civil service system is broken. Everybody knows it. Congress knows it. And they need to do something about it. It needs to be reformed. We see a simple situation where last year, out of 2 million federal employees, 0.53% were fired. 0.53%. That means 99.5% of the federal employees were not fired in that time period. On the private sector, the number is dramatically higher.
And also talks about the federal unions he's in and how that protects him. Tell us about that and how much that costs.
Well, taxpayers are funding these federal unions, $177 million worth for salaries, rents, travel. It's obscene. And yet Congress allows that to occur also.
But, like, is your supervisor cool with it, or?
She's no knows.
Carafa also told our journalist how he gets away with his antics even though he files his required ethics and financial disclosure forms every year, forms that are meant to protect against any conflict of interest.
No one knows.
But the best part about it is that there's this ethics form that I have to submit every year to the government because I'm a contracting person. And on the contracting form, I put all of my like officer positions on it, and somebody just like rubber stamps it and it goes forward.
Nice.
So there is. So it's like a financial disclosure form, right? So if you're involved in federal contracts, you have to disclose the organizations that you're like, if you're like on a board, or if you're a financial officer. So I'm the treasurer of my neighborhood commission. So I disclose that. And so like that's if there's any contract stuff that happens in the federal government, they're like, oh, that's the contracting that happens. You're on the board of this nonprofit, and all of a sudden they get a $300 million contract, and they have 3 employees. And that's what, but I can disclose all of my other stuff, and the guy rubber stamping it is just kind of like, I don't know if he's all there. He's so checked out, and he's looking at this stuff like, yeah, whatever, just boom, go. And so now I can look back and be like, I don't know, the ethics offer was aware of what I was doing.
So nobody's watching, and the people who are watching don't seem to care. The State Department employee gloats about how his supervisors just rubber stamp his federal government forms. No accountability whatsoever. But when it comes to exposing government corruption, Judicial Watch is the authority, and Bill Marshall is a senior investigator there. Bill, tell us about what's going on here.
Right, James. Well, these forms were designed expressly to hold government employees accountable. And if this employee's supervisor isn't carefully reviewing the form and its contents and enforcing them, then it serves no purpose other than to provide cover for the employee's nefarious activities while he's on government time.
So what can be done to reform the system?
Government employees need to do their jobs. His employer needs to do, his supervisor needs to do his job and examine that form.
Carafa wears his DSA sensibilities and values like a badge of honor.
It's just everything.
Everything.
Every level.
At the same time we were meeting with Carafa, this memo was posted on the Metro DC DSA website, warning their members of Project Veritas and other infiltrators. As we were wrapping up production of this report, we announced on social media the upcoming release. Within hours, the Democratic Socialists of America in D.C. noticed they'd be featured in the story and began ghosting their public profiles. Internal emails and their Slack channels urged members who worked for the federal government to, quote, lock down all social media accounts and activate two-factor authorization on all important accounts, unquote. And so our deep state investigation unfolds. Finally, we get to see the faces of these shadowy figures and hear what their motivations are. It's necessary for us to unmask them, to personify them, to put a face to the individuals who seek to undermine the fabric of our republic. And we are not the source. They are the source, in their own words.